Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Amanda Wilkie. Hi, Amanda. Thank you for being on this episode of the podcast.
Hey, John. Always happy to be here with you.
Great. And Amanda specializes in technology and process consulting, among other things. So we have a great topic for you here, and that is how to put process back into your automation. Two of your favorite topics, process, automation, and you're working a lot with firms in these areas. So I'm going to start with kind of an easy question just to get the conversation rolling here. Why is it important from your perspective that firms really standardize their processes?
Yeah. Well, and John, when we think about automation, a lot of times we think about the technology. So we get excited about some of the technology that is out there and what it can do. We get excited. We may automate a couple of tasks. Again, that gets really exciting and it can really deliver some quick wins, but it's important to really step back and make sure that you're focusing on the process. You'll hear me say it over and over again, John. You can automate. I should say you can automate an inconsistent process, but what you end up doing is just building a dumb bot. So you really want to work on consistency in your processes, so that it makes it easier to automate when you're ready. So you want to step back. You want to, get excited about the technology, but you also really want to focus on process, and so that you can be more strategic in marrying your process and technology for automation.
And I think I've heard you say before, Amanda, that if you try and automate an inefficient or maybe ineffective process, all you're doing is maximizing the negative outcomes of that process. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely, John. So if you try to automate an inconsistent or inefficient process, what you're going to do is just speed up those inefficiencies. You're not actually going to be more efficient. It's actually going to probably slow you down, and it's going to have a negative effect because people won't get excited about the automation if it doesn't work effectively and efficiently.
That's great. So standardizing those processes are key. Let's talk about the solutions a little bit that firms are using to automate their processes. What are you seeing out there?
Well, John, a lot of firms are starting with what they already have available to them. So many firms are using things like the Microsoft Power Suite, so Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI, everything that has power in it from Microsoft. Many firms have access to these tools through their Microsoft 365 subscriptions, or they can add them on relatively easily. And so firms are kind of starting with what's available to them and getting some of those quick wins, automating some tasks, and then kind of making that case to go on to larger applications, larger investments, things like UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism as well. So those are the tools, but you also have to think about the knowledge and the talent aspect of it, John. And if you don't feel like you have that experience or that knowledge within your firm, or if you're in a hurry and you don't feel like you have time to develop those, because your IT folks, if they have the time, they're going to roll up their sleeves and they're going to get excited about some of these tools. But if you don't have that time or that talent, there are plenty of organizations out there that you can actually contract it out and get some help building some of that automation. And some of those resources, they may actually just build it for you and let it run in your environment. They may even do what's called a bot as a service. So we've heard of software as a service. We've heard things like infrastructure as a service. Well, now you can actually get automation or a bot as a service as well. So you have a couple of different tools and a couple of different options when it comes to resources.
That's interesting. And as firms, I feel like there's a lot changing in firms today, or there should be a lot changing in firms today. And in that conversations, or in those conversations, is this thought process around, well, should we develop the capability in house, or should we send that out? And what I think I'm hearing you say, and I want you to respond to this to see if it's on track or not, is almost developing the capability around identifying opportunities for automation, using kind of what you currently have to test it out, to gain some small wins, but also thinking bigger picture. And is there an opportunity to work with maybe an outside provider to help kind of maximize or really take on some larger automation projects in your firm? Is that how you're thinking about it too?
Yeah, you have the thing there is, John, that you have options. So again, if you have the time, if you have someone that's passionate about it who can develop those skills, that's great. Or you can leverage outside resources. You can also, those outside resources can actually help with some of that knowledge transfer as well. Now, you mentioned, making sure that you're focusing on like the strategy, so like what to automate and why. And that's something that I think is very important, because even if you do outsource it, you want to determine what is really suitable for automation. And so a few things to keep in mind is employee involvement. So tasks that become, or tasks that have a lot of human touch can become very error prone, because we're humans, and to err is human. So if it's time consuming for an employee, or if there is a high level, high probability of errors, that may be something that you want to look at for automation. The complexity as well. So is it a complex task with a lot of that human intervention? If so, you want to make sure that you are simplifying that as much as possible, because as we talked about earlier, you can automate those complex tasks, but if it's not smooth and efficient, then you are just speeding up inefficiencies. Two other things, John, to consider is the volume of a task. So if a task fluctuates in volume, say in busy season, like collecting documents from clients or getting signed documents back, things like that. If it's a high volume, or if it fluctuates, that may be a good opportunity for automation, because you can smooth out those spikes in the need of the task. And then the last one is, we've mentioned standardization. I really like to call it consistency, because you want the process to be as consistent as possible, so that it's much easier to automate. So those are some of those considerations. But going back to your original question, I think you're right. You have to maintain the strategy over what you're going to automate, whether or not you are going to do that in-house, or whether or not you're going to leverage someone outside your organization.
Yeah, that's great. And it's helpful to kind of have you walk us through like the categories to think about in terms of opportunities for automation. And I want to get to asking you maybe some specific tasks you see within some of those categories. But before I do, related to kind of some of the successes you've seen firms have in this area. So firms that have identified an opportunity and actually put forth the resources, the time to automate. What are some of the successes you're seeing? What are some of the results you're seeing out there?
Yeah, so we've had some really great examples. And John, I love hearing these stories from the firms that are in the Boomer technology circles, or even the Boomer CIO circle. When we get these groups together, the things that they're sharing are absolutely, amazing. And almost every firm we talk to right now is trying to automate what we call that last mile of the tax return. So we've got to get those 8879s back from clients, and once that's back, it's got to get filed somewhere. You have to go into the tax solution and release it for e-filing. There's still some administrative work that needs to be done. And again, that's one of those tasks that it fluctuates. There's a lot during tax season, not so much outside of tax season. So a lot of firms are having success automating that piece of it. And again, keep in mind, they didn't automate the entire process. They're automating that last mile. So getting those 8879s signed back in, automating the filing of them, and then even automating, like updating the workflow solution, updating their practice management solution, changing the status of the returns or of the jobs. So that is one that, again, many firms is working on. Other things that we've heard are things like automating extensions. We talked to a firm that every February they had an admin staff that would go in and proactively extend returns that they knew were going to be extended. They were able to create a bot to do that. And if I remember correctly, they were using Microsoft Power Automate for desktop, but they were able to automate those extensions, and so they were able to free up that admin person in February so that they could focus on client relationships and more value-added tasks. Another one that I thought was interesting, John, there's a firm, when they finish the partnership return, they created a bot that takes all the K1s and delivers that K1 into the document management system folder for the individual, for the partner in that partnership, if they are doing that individual's return. So they were able to distribute those K1s pretty easily. John, if the bot finds a K1 that doesn't have a folder to go to, there's a little dumping ground, a folder that they move everything into. I thought this would be a great opportunity for marketing and business development. If you are the partner that's doing that partnership return, look at those K1s and find out, is this an opportunity to get this individual as a client? Why are we not doing this individual's return? I don't think necessarily that the firm was using it as a marketing opportunity, but that's something that I thought was pretty interesting. There's definitely an opportunity there. So again, John, there's just a ton of automation opportunities out there within firms.
Well, and I like that you bring up marketing, because as you were mentioning the boomer technology circles and the CIO circle, I couldn't help but think about our marketing circle, which is our group of CMOs of larger firms. Automation is a huge piece of their conversation as well, because all of a sudden they look up and they think, wow, we have 42 services to support from a marketing perspective. And everyone wants each of those services to grow in some form. And what does the email automation look like to continue to communicate, not just with prospective clients, but with kind of, to your point, current clients right now? And how can we use automation to help us better identify opportunities within our current clients? So it's not just the service delivery piece, which is what you're hitting on there. It's also that kind of leading up to that service delivery piece. So
yeah. And John, we're seeing automation in like client onboarding, staff onboarding, staff offboarding. So there's opportunity for automation in every corner of the firm.
Yep. And I love to marry topics together, and I know you do too, Amanda. And we have all this conversation happening around client experience, and we have all this conversation happening around automation. What does it look like to leverage automation to create an amazing client experience for your target clients? It's just so much there. That's probably a whole nother episode we could probably, talk about. So, one question we always like to ask, Amanda, is, okay, outside of the accounting profession, kind of the traditional accounting profession as we know it, how is automation playing a role? Is there things happening outside our profession that we should really be paying attention to so we can leverage within our profession, or what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, John, I would say keep an eye on the technology outside of our profession. So again, a lot of us are leveraging things like the Microsoft suite, but some of those other tools that I mentioned, UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, keep an eye on those, because there is, every profession out there, every profession, every industry is thinking about how do they use automation? How do they actually do do more with the same, not less. That's the key. We're not actually replacing people. We're automating these tasks so that, like you mentioned, we're able to provide an excellent client experience with the same amount of people that we have today. We're just also able to do it and identify opportunities with the technology and with automation.
Yeah, that's great, Amanda. So as we round out our conversation here, because we're getting close to our 20 minutes or less here, what's your kind of parting words you would have for our listeners? If you could recommend something that they do, they check out, or next step, or maybe a conversation they have internally, what's your recommendation there?
Yeah. John, they can always reach out to us. I'm always excited to have conversations like this with firms. So if they want to talk about, building an automation roadmap, or if they want to talk about focusing on their processes, if they want to talk more about the technology, they can always reach out to me. We have a ton of resources. And John, actually one of my recent Boomer Bulletin articles, I think back in December, was actually on putting the process back in automation. So I'm hoping that you will put a link to that in along with this podcast, so that can be a resource for them as well. And then they can find a ton of resources on the boomer.com site.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. And we will include a link to that article here in the show notes. So Amanda, as always, it's a pleasure having you on the podcast. So thank you for making time for that.
Likewise. Thanks, John.
Yes. And for our listeners, if you like these topics, we release new episodes every Tuesday morning, and we always switch it up. This week, it might be about technology. Next week, it could be about growth or process or leadership or talent. So please subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much.